Record.
Okay.
Hello, welcome to Jesus TV. This is an episode of WakeNOsis. It's episode 6. The title is Two Possessed Armies Are Now Assembling. In this episode, we are going to look at the kind of trance-like, I didn't say trance, I said trance-like altered state of mind that Nephi went forth in on the third trip to get the plates. This is speaking of the Book of Mormon. There's a story. And Jonathan, can you summarize that story? Take 1, take 2, take 3 with that.
Hey, so the story goes that there's this, I'm always thinking about the people that aren't Mormon.
Okay, that's fine.
So yeah, obviously they're open-minded people if they're still listening after hearing I'm going to talk about the Book of Mormon. So anyways, so Nephi is, let me get more light here so you can see me. Maybe that's a little better, not much. Oh well, okay, I'm half in the dark. So anyways, Nephi has to go back to Jerusalem. The story goes that on your journey, and God commands something. You know what's funny? I sent you that little text or that little email saying that we ought to do a story, a fictional story about somebody that has to exercise faith.
Right.
And then you sent me this episode and talk about, and this is a story, so, but it's not fictional. So
right.
Or if someone's listening and they can believe it's fictional if they want to, that's fine.
Exactly.
Anyways, so the story goes that Nephi decides, well, God says to Nephi, well, to his dad, he says, hey, you need to send the boys back to Jerusalem and get these plates. And so Nephi says, I'll go and do what God told me to do. I'll go and do what the Lord commands. So I'll do whatever God says. And and so he and his brothers, he has 2 older brothers who are kind of naughty and are really not happy about this journey that they're on. And then he has a brother named Sam, and Sam's a good boy. And they all go back to Jerusalem, and they're going to try and do this thing. So this is really fascinating because, sorry, I'm going to commentate just a little bit, or should I just tell the story?
You're fine.
Should I just tell the story and then we'll commentate afterwards?
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah,
let's do that. Yeah, okay. So they go back to Jerusalem, and the guy who has these plates is now plates. So it's a history, okay? So it's like kind of like the Bible up until that point, kind of with some extra books probably and stuff. So so it's a record, and this guy named Laban has it. So they go to Laban and they say to Laban, hey Laban, will you give us these plates? Which seems kind of brash, you know. And Laban says, I was gonna swear, but I'll say heck no. He says, no, I'm not gonna do that. Get out of here. I'm getting it right. First thing he says no, get out of here, and he has him chased off.
Yeah.
So then they go to their house because they used to live.
And he accuses them of being thieves.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he accuses them of being thieves, and they're like, uh-oh, and they run for it. So then they used to live in Jerusalem. They have a house there, and they kind of left and absconded out of town. So their house is still there. So they go back to the house and they get all anything that's valuable, you know. So it's like, you know, all their gold and silver and anything that they think that, you know, could be, you know, enough to purchase these plates. And they go back, they take it all to Laban and they say, hey Laban, we really want these plates. You know, the plates probably aren't worth all of this, but look, we'll give you all of this for if you'll give us the plates. And then he looks at all this property and he goes, oh my gosh. And of course, he's not an honest man. And so he says, I'm going to just take all their stuff. And so he says, you stole all this stuff. You stole it from me. Sounds like a movie, you know, something to do in the movies. But says, "You stole all this from me," and then he commands his guards to chase after him and try and kill him. And so at this point, they're really upset, and they go out and they hide in this cave, as I remember, in the cavity of a rock, it says. And his older brothers get real angry, and they start to wallop on Nephi, because they see Nephi as the source of all of this, because he's the one most, inclined to do this crazy thing. It's a crazy thing that God has commanded them to do. And they start hitting him with a rod, it says. So they take a stick and they're giving him a beating. And an angel appears, and the angel says, "Knock it off, stop beating your brother," and he reprimands them. And then the angel disappears, but uh, they're still upset, even though they've seen an angel and everything. So then finally, Nephi decides that he will go back by himself, right?
Yep.
Or didn't they draw lots?
Nope.
And it fell upon
Nope,
Laban.
that was the first take.
Oh, that was the first take. Laban went the first time. Yes,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry. So Laban's the oldest brother.
That's right.
Okay, so now Nephi decides to go in by himself. He goes in by night. He says, "I went not knowing beforehand the things that I should do." And there's another part of that phrase, but I can't remember what it is.
I'll read that.
I was led by the Spirit. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I was led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. Nevertheless, I went forth.
Okay, good. So he's going forth and he's just listening, right? Like, where do I go? What do I do? He's not quite sure, and he's kind of meandering around the streets of Jerusalem, and it's nighttime, and he comes upon a guy in the street who's drunk, and he realizes that it's Laban, the one that had chased them off and taken all of their property, and he feels that he's supposed to kill Laban, and he says to himself, "Never before have I shed blood." So, like, I've never killed anybody in my life, nor would I, is kind of the sense. It's like, this is murder. And he kind of decides in his mind, like this can't be right. But then he hears the Spirit of God, and it says basically that it is better that one man should perish, that one person should perish or die, than that a whole nation should die and dwindle in unbelief. And then he knew that it was of God, and I'm sure that he knew God's voice by that point. And so he does the deed, and he kills Laban, and then he takes and he puts on him all of Laban's clothes and armor. I've always thought about this, like, because it would have been all bloody. So how did he work that out? I don't know.
Right.
But the point being is, he throws on all the clothes, and then he goes, and he still doesn't know where he's going or what he's doing. And as he's going through the town, he comes upon another guy who is Zoram, and he's the servant of Laban, and he's a servant of Laban, and he speaks like he's Laban. I don't know how Laban spoke, but he pretends he's Laban, and it's dark, and he says, "Take me to the treasury where the plates are hidden." And so Laban takes him, and then he goes in, he gets the plates, and then he tells Zoram to follow him outside the wall of Jerusalem to where his brethren are. And Zoram thinks that he's talking about the brethren of the church. So apparently Laban had a meeting with the brethren of the church, or of the wouldn't have been of the church. I don't remember what they would have called it. But anyways, so they go out there, and then Zoram sees and realizes it's not Laban, and he gets scared and tries to run. And Nephi grabs him, and he says, "Hey, look, stay with us, and you'll be free. You'll be a free man," because he was a servant of Laban. And so he decides that's a good deal, and they go back and they take the plates back. And of course, the end of the story is that this becomes their scriptures. So it's like, and they go to a promised land, and they become a very numerous people, and this is the way that they're able to connect with the truths that were revealed by God to all of the prophets in Jerusalem before that. So that's the story.
Thank you very much. So later in this episode, we will focus on how it is that Nephi proceeded, in his words, not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. I was led by the Spirit, which I like to call take three, because they had take one, take two. Those two didn't work in terms of the results they were looking for, but it totally worked out how I believe God wanted it to be. And then take three, which then got the results they were looking for and God had set. And in take three, the attempt is, I believe it's an example or an approximation of how the people of Zion, an actual army of God, because I'll tell you again, this episode's called Two Possessed Armies Are Now Assembling. It's kind of like God put that in my head. Okay, there's two armies assembling. How are they assembling? Because I don't see the recruitment things, but you'll see it's being assembled like Nephi. People are going forth not knowing beforehand, and they don't even know that they're being assembled into army a lot of times. And that we will go forth once we and these other people are awakened or dehypnotized into an altered state of consciousness, as a result of yielding to the Spirit of Jesus, and thus becoming immersed sufficiently in a symbiotic spirit possession. So the last episode, we talked about symbiotic spirit possession. So you can be possessed by a spirit that's kind of guiding you, telling you what to do. I could also call that the Jesus spirit possession. But it's necessary to join the ranks of Jesus's army in the end of days wrap-up scene. It'll be a holy, woke army, if you will, and it'll be composed of those who wear the yoke of freedom. For those who have eyes to see, that's starting to happen even now. Any thoughts on that, Jonathan, before I continue?
Possession. So to be possessed, it's a strange thing to say that God's army is possessed.
Yes.
But the truth is that in the Old Testament, it talks about slavery. It's kind of weird, but it uses the same wording to describe like when an Israelite has a slave and the way that God considers his people. So to be owned by God is to be a tabernacle where he can dwell within. That was what went through my mind. It's not some spooky thing. It's like we desire to be filled with a good spirit. So
yeah. And as we go into this episode, we'll be kind of talking about that notion of possession, maybe not heavily, because there's some other things we'll cover. So definitionally, it's something that we can, but let's go ahead with this, and we'll contrast this with the opposing army. So we talked about two armies, God's army, and then there's Satan's army that is beginning to assemble even now, for those that have eyes to see, and they assemble in a stupor trance, brought on by a corresponding yielding. So they also yield, but this time to a parasitic spirit possession. And they march like robots in a hypnotic, comfortably numbing yoke of bondage, sleep of hell way. And so the sleep of hell, by the way, we talked about that earlier. That's basically anything that takes you away from Christ. Christ is the connection with Christ is the ultimate woke person is the one who's closest to Christ. The further you go away from Christ, the deeper you go into an alternate reality, which could be called the sleep of hell. And there's various degrees of this. And just as there would be various degrees of the level at which you are surrendering your faculties. And I guess I do want to point out that we all surrender our faculties to a degree. We talked about that in previous episodes. So you set yourself down in front of the TV. You start yielding to whatever the Hollywood producer has created, And so your faculties, your brain is now seeing images. How in the world are you seeing images that that person intended? And how are they in the world evoking emotional responses? How is it they can make you salivate by showing oranges or lemons? They are very aware as they compose these things that there's a combination of things that can actually put your mind into a state that is alternate. And oftentimes we are watching things to relax, that is, to get our mind off of something. And so when we talk about this spirit possession, we have approximations of it all the time. And we won't go deep into that, but I just want to acknowledge that the idea that um, that a devil or a god could have influence on an individual is just it's a non sequitur. Of course they do, because humans who are not gods, humans can do this. For instance, I used to kind of play this game. I can make, for instance, these noise. I can still do it. I've got these vocal cords, and if I press the air in a correct fashion, I can go get my kids to pick up something off the floor. It's like I've got a Roomba vacuum, okay? And I'm directing. It's not a robot, but what so I'll see how far. Addie, could you hand me that? And all I've done is make some vocal cords that noises that she had learned. When my dad said, "Can you go pick that thing up?" and he points, she goes and does it. You say, well, she does it because she loves you. Ah, now you're getting at the key of it. What if she loved the devil? And then I'll say, oh, Addie, could you come over here? I got this itch. And you just see how far these vocal cords can take you before she doesn't yield. She feels like she's being manipulated. Come and do the dishes. And so you yourself can control other people. And what we try to control them on is the principle of love, because I'm just yanking their chain when I'm doing that. But guess who's yanking your chain? They call them flaxen cords. And you say, well, no, that's Hollywood. There's somebody behind Hollywood. So you know those deep state actors, people talk about the deep state. There's somebody who's organizing them in a way that they're unaware of, through hate, through misery. And so these people who are doing dark works, they may not be aware, but they're controlling other humans based on spiritual connections that are hard to detect. Just like Nephi, I did go forth not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. There's people who get in some really dark places and say, I don't know how I got here. Well, that sounds a lot like Nephi. So when I'm talking about spirit possession, go ahead and go as far as you can or not as far as you can. But for me, this is one of the emphasis that God has, for some reason, he's emphasized this. And I believe it's because you're going to see in the next 20, 30 years, whatever time frame, as we lead up to the final scenes, you're going to see some very obvious things. People are going to get possessed in a way that looks like Halloween movies. And you're like, try to explain it by, oh, they've got schizophrenia. No, you'll be hard pressed. I believe that and that would be true of the works of God, that you're going to see it turn into a spiritual battle. So right now we've got battle that looks pretty much like just carnal, temporal battles going on, like in Ukraine and so forth. But behind the scenes, there are, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That's what Paul recognized, that he believed in spirit possession because he knew that they weren't wrestling just against humans, that ultimately there was something controlling a lot of these things. Go ahead, Jonathan.
I was just going to say that it's going to be true on the other side. There'll be things that'll look like Halloween movies, and there'll be things that will look like the great stories of the great stories of virtue that have been told throughout the ages too. There are people who will go to their deaths praising God there will be people who will see divine deliverance. They'll be led to go to a certain place to do a certain thing, even though it doesn't make sense, and then they'll be delivered in a miraculous way. It's all going to be played out, like you said. There'll be the Halloween like thing on the one side, and on the other side, they're going to play out these other things because of the spirit that is,
Yeah,
guiding them.
is in the hearts of men. So the scripture that God brought to my heart, and he's been doing it for years now, he just doesn't let up. He says this is Alma 34:34. For that same spirit, which spirit, we could ask? Well, there's two main spirits, the spirit of the devil, and then the spirit of Christ. For that same spirit which doth possess your bodies at the time that you go out of this life. So apparently we're all going to be possessed when we leave this life. Whether you think you're possessed right now, I'll leave that to you. But here's God's word saying that same spirit that has power to possess your bodies at the time that you go out of this life, that same spirit will have power to possess your body in that eternal world. And so that's where I'm very comfortable with the term of spirit possession, because it's clear that you're going to leave this world with a certain spirit. You can make that ethereal. You can say, well, that's my just general desires, and you don't have to personalize it. But Jesus personalizes that to me, because I take the sacrament and it says that I will always have his spirit to be with me. Now it's like, is that inside you, Greg? I think so, but it doesn't really matter if he's inside me or just 5 inches or 5 feet from me. He will have an influence upon me. And that's what most religious people know, that they try to evoke spirits, that we might invoke the spirit. They say in the Halloween type dark side, we're going to conjure spirit. But before we dive into the meat of this episode, I have a rather long prelude to this discussion that Jesus has added to this episode for a wise purpose in him. So I'm gonna roll pretty quick through this. Jonathan, stop me anytime, though. Feel comfortable. I've liked our discussion so far. Is there any other points you have to make about that spirit possession?
No.
Okay. When you #hear him, Jesus, over a long enough period, you will notice a pattern. You'll notice that Jesus will lay down in your mind, and then eventually upon your fleshy heart, layer upon layer, maybe in episode after episode. That's pointing to me. You notice, Greg, how episode after episode, Jesus has been looking at this WakeNOsis, hypnosis kind of contrast, and I'm getting these layers of understanding, kind of like different angles, understandings that are relevant to your particular mission on earth. So most people, well, that's what would be able to recognize that if they're recognizing the source of their gifts, for instance, their gifts come on layers and layers, like learning language. As Jesus, through the Holy Ghost, does this. Did you raise your hand? Okay.
No.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. As Jesus, through the Holy Ghost, does this layering, Jesus will use a kind of mashup language: words, images, circumstances, scriptures, impressions, repetitions, experiences, voices, others' voices, dreams, imaginations, visions, hymns, songs, etc., etc. And so you can see the layering that goes on is not maybe just layerings of understandings, but layerings of emphasis and layerings of different senses that he will use. It's a mashup language that's very personalized to your unique understandings and needs, your unique understandings and needs. And so here I'm referring to, we did an episode called Jesus Uses Mashup Language at Jesus TV. You can ask me about it if you want, but that's, it was just, Jesus was emphasizing, this is how I talk in a multifaceted way. And he's always talking. Anything, Jonathan?
Oh, actually, yeah, I'll say something really fast about that. That I read this recently. See if I can find it really fast. I can find it. All right. Um, oh, I can't remember where it is. I think it might be in Revelation, but he says, "I'm about to come," and he's talking about his coming. And then strangely, so we've always thought, about Jesus coming in the clouds. It's like this is something I want to make clear before I start that I am not I'm not um, denouncing the way that we thought about this. I'm adding something to it. I don't know whether it'll happen that we thought. This Jesus comes in the cloud, right?
Yeah.
With all of his holy angels. So the question is, what does that mean? And it's like we will all see him coming together. And so I thought about that, and what it said afterwards really struck me. And what he says, and he says, and how will I come, or how will I come, or how will I utter my voice? He says, and I'm about to come, and he says, in earthquakes and tumults and this and that, and all of these negative things. Am I cutting out?
Yeah. But I noticed you only started cutting out when you went towards the camera. Interesting.
Okay, so just stay put.
No, if you
All
move
right.
back further, let's see if are you able to,
Okay,
like
try
that?
this.
Yeah, that's interesting that you were fine, and then all of a sudden when you moved towards the camera, it's like you were blocked in signal or something.
It's trying to pick up all the movement because it has to change everything. Okay, I'm gonna try this. So basically, he says the way that I'm going to uh, I can't remember if he says speak. It might have been just speaking his voice, so I may be wrong on the coming part. But the idea is that he's going to come in multiple ways, and in that particular instance, what he was talking about is he's going to come in judgment. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
yeah, it does.
So,
And go ahead.
it's a mashed up language.
Yeah,
Like you say.
and that's the language that the devil uses as well. So he's going to come for all of our senses, and put us to sleep, hypnotize us with many different things. He can use music, he can use food, he can use liquor. There's many different ways that he can get our attention. So these two armies are, well, of course, I mentioned this because of this this episode of WakeNOsis. Two possessed armies are now assembling. Jesus is having me do as I've done before. Now, here's where I pause. I just said, Jesus is having me do as I've done before. I paused here to emphasize the phrase I just used. Notice I could have said in this episode of WakeNOsis, I'm doing as I've done before. But again, when I am writing down the things that Jesus brings to my mind, and I say such a phrase that emphasizes me as a lone actor, Jesus will have me immediately correct what I have written to reflect the truth, that I am not writing my ideas, doing my thing independently, but I'm following directions from Jesus. And when I do, I can always feel this sense of, and I'm not bragging here, oh, I'm so special that I'm being directed by in every iota of my life by Jesus. No, I'm not saying that, but instead, I'm saying I'm fulfilling a commandment that Jesus gave me when I was born again in 2015, which Jesus, he continued to amp up at every turn. He said, Greg, trust in the Lord, and I want you to acknowledge my hand in all things, and I shall direct your paths. Thus, when I was drafting this script, I initially wrote those words about the episode of WakeNOsis. I said, I'm doing as I've done here before, or I'm doing as I've done before. Jesus immediately corrected my language and had me edit the phrase to instead read, in this episode of WakeNOsis, Jesus is having me do as I've done before. So all of a sudden, I've got Jesus. He's the one directing my affairs. And I bring this to your attention because this Jesus wordsmith Greg, heavenly correction action is a constant pattern in my life with Jesus lately. I've never seen anything like it before growing up, but it's like just this emphasis inside me, like, nope, you're doing it with Jesus. For example, I'll often say that some phrase that accidentally implies or could be interpreted to imply my independent action. Greg built this, Greg did this, I got this, common language. As in, for example, I got this idea. And then what happens is that Jesus will immediately correct me, and Jesus will have me rephrase what I'm saying in a way that acknowledges Jesus's provenance of my actions. Provenance, Provenance, a word meaning where it's from, and that's what God wants me to acknowledge. Where's this coming from? And He's wanting to emphasize that the things I do need to have an emphasis on where they're from, the ultimate source, namely Jesus. And it's not to convince people I run with Jesus. No, that's between them and Jesus. It's to reinforce inside my mind His presence. For example, a year or two ago, when Jesus first introduced the final, I think final name of the thing, this big thing that Jesus is building with me. Over the years, Jesus has layered many different names for it. So I talk about this layering of languages. I struggled to speak the phrase in the exact way that Jesus wanted me to refer to it, and it being my Jesus Greg world. And Jesus was very exacting and specific how He wants me to refer to it as my Jesus Greg world, my Jesus Greg world, my Jesus Greg world. And the truth is, it was a mouthful, and I'm just like, okay, that's because I would say like my world. So I'm building my world. That didn't. It feels like I hadn't brushed my teeth yet. I'm going to bed, haven't brushed my teeth, so that doesn't sound right. So it's like my Jesus Greg world. Yep, that sounds right. My world. Nope. My Greg Jesus world. No, that doesn't sound right. And so I can't even accidentally say Jesus's name last. It's like Jesus Greg world. And I'm like, that seems right. And so I'm finally getting used to that phrase, my Jesus Greg world. There's been other things Jesus had told me to say. And eventually my tongue gets used to this. It's kind of like a tongue muscle memory, if you will. One of the things I say, street preaching. Boy, it's taken me a long time to have it flow, but I'm a dirty, filthy, rotten, hard-hearted, hopeful sinner. And that comes out like some kind of song or poem, but it's important thing that I say to reinforce to myself who we all are as mortals, dirty, filthy, rotten, hard-hearted, hopeful sinners. All right, that's the end of that intro, and it's meant to emphasize the way in which, right there, where Jesus is controlling me in how I talk. And I could not yield to it. Say, no, I'm just going to call it my Jesus, my Jesus world, or my world. I could do that, and Jesus would let me. But I'm hearing what He does, and so I change the phrase. So I yield to that. Well, that was a huge aside to the opening of this episode. Thanks for your patience, Jonathan, and all you listeners. But as you'll soon see, that aside, that intro, acknowledging Jesus hovering directions over me, he's directing things, and the content of this episode and the rest of the elements of my life is hugely relevant to what we're going to cover in this episode. The idea that Jesus would guide us like that. In short, I've been recruited into Jesus's army, and He's training me to become possessed by His Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, so that I can fulfill my special mission. This next section is called an additional aside on language. But first, I want to complete, Jesus wants me to complete the aside issue of the unique spiritual language and understandings you're encountering in this episode and the previous episode of WakeNOsis. You'll notice that words and concepts like hypnosis, WakeNOsis, dehypnotized, dehypnosis, spirit possession, are not traditional words used within mainstream religious traditions. I don't think I've heard spirit possession other than that scripture very often at all growing up. And so Jonathan's like, okay, well, that sounds different. And he grew up in the same faith tradition for a time. I've never seen or heard Sunday school lessons covering the exact topics we are covering in these episodes of WakeNOsis, nor the exact language and the parables we're using. And Jesus, or I should more appropriately say Jesus is having us use in these episodes. But I have heard mysterious language like this when I hashtag hear Jesus. This is the kind of language that I hear. And so what I'm in these episodes, I'm basically presenting what Jesus is putting into my mind. So Jesus is kind of like having an individualized Sunday school, a homeschool for Greg. It's very interesting, it's mysterious, and it's also challenging. And to my point, there's a reason for that. Jesus will speak to each of his children in a way that is unique to them, that is fit not only for their personality and particular needs and limitations, but also fit for the respective missions, for their respective mission on earth. It's as if Jesus is building for each of his children a personal world. Yes? See www.getmorejesus for more on that modern world parable and tool. The language and understandings you are hearing in these episodes are fit by Jesus to my particular non-traditional, sometimes quirky personality, weaknesses, and needs. Jesus knows exactly what to communicate to me, to wake me up, to dehypnotize me, to lead my heart and my mind into the holy altered state of consciousness that Nephi had, a state of symbiotic spirit possession that he wants me to be in so that I can follow his spirit, do what his spirit wants me to do. And also, Jesus has called me on a particularly mysterious mission myself that requires he gives me new language in order for me to see and do the things Jesus has assigned me to figure it out. My mission is to build Zion in the open, like Noah built the ark in the open. It's also called building early Zion in the open, kind of like out of the closet, if you will. And related to that mission, building with Jesus, one of the first blatant, explicit, even electronic Jesus worlds in the Jesus verse. It is a technical mission with a technical and new language of understandings required, and gospel understandings, and retranslations and mashups of traditional religious spiritual language. I need it, but here's the thing. Few of God's children need what I need in the form I need it, at least at this time in history. Traditional religious language, traditional parables, conventional understandings are still adequate and perhaps optimal for most Christians, given their respective missions and personalities. These statements are certainly, just a minute, I got to put that font in a different so I can see it. Okay. Yeah. These statements I've just made are certainly remind me of what Jesus told me in the final chapter of a very important Jesus book that he had me write. In that final chapter, Jesus told me, they don't need your book, Greg. They don't want your book. And I actually put that in the book. The chapter was called Amazing. And Jesus was disabusing me. No, he was telling me, don't worry, this is not going to be a popular book. What Jesus was reiterating, though, was that he is what he's reiterated to me since I was born again, is that one language fits one. Much of my understanding, like much of other people's understanding, fits our respective relationship with Jesus, very individualized. And a still small voice seems to tell me that this principle will be hugely important as we move towards Zion culture. There will be a realization of the limits of traditional language and understandings. At the same time, recognition of the limits of any particular person's unique language of understanding with Jesus. That will help keep us humble and incline us not to condemn the things we do not understand that may seem inappropriate, but are appropriate for a given person, a given time and history, etc. And it is as it is on one hand, folks don't need Jesus Greg stuff. Greg doesn't need what other folks need yet. However, in the generations to come, you can count on change and revival. Old will become new again. Everything is changing in this last turn of the earth. Finally, I want to bring your attention to that most of the concepts we are sharing in this episode and previous episodes have corollary concepts within the traditional gospel and scriptures. For example, the concept of symbiotic spirit possession. We've already talked about that, Jonathan and I. For example, Jesus world. Well, what's a Jesus world? I don't see that in the scriptures. Have you ever heard the kingdom is within? So building a kingdom, a sphere within inside yourself, it's not too far of a stretch. But we are going to have these external worlds that will represent that kingdom externally for us. For example, Jesus's army. So Jesus has Greg introduce this episode that says 2 possessed armies are now assembling. Where does it ever talk about Jesus and army? Well, it doesn't take much brain power to understand that there's armies. Well, anyhow, it's part of our doctrine at LDS that there was a war in heaven, and with wars, you're going to have armies, and you got to choose sides and so forth. My point is that the language that I use might be different on the surface, but it can correlate or link back to. But what it does is it gives me a fullness that I need. It gives me some particulars that may not directly connect, but may add to the things that I already received that are traditional. Much of what Jesus spoke in the New Testament, for example, was simply a rephrasing of what is found in the Old Testament. Jesus brought a fullness of understanding in the New Testament by sharing new parables. He brought a new language to something that was old. The most significant of which was showing exactly what the Old Testament lamb sacrifices were all about, a living sacrifice. What better way to express that concept than becoming a sacrificial lamb himself, Jesus? And now he's trying to have us speak a similar language by offering our hearts like lambs. Hey, I've got a lamb right here. It's beating. Boom, boom. Give it to me. Metaphorically, of course, a broken heart, eventually fully. So that's called mashup language. So now, if you've watched the previous episodes of WakeNOsis, you know that Jesus has been laying down layer upon layer, episode upon episode of understanding that is fit for my, Greg Muller, the Jesus Street Preacher's mind and heart, things that Greg and few others need, a way of understanding what Jesus is doing with me and to me. Recall Jesus said to me, Greg, these repetitious retrainings I'm having you do every morning and throughout the day, what is it like, Greg? He asked. It's like you're hypnotizing me, Jesus. And then Jesus explained to me episode after episode of WakeNOsis. All these episodes explain this. These are ways that I like, okay, what it's like hypnosis. And what is that, Jesus? And he says, WakeNOsis and all these different features. And he's explaining to me and what he's having me do is actually dehypnotizing me, waking me up into an altered state of consciousness that allows me to believe, see, feel, think, and do things that my previous Babylonian state of consciousness, the hypnotic sleep of hell, experienced simply as normal state of consciousness. That is, in a ripe antichrist cult culture, U.S. mainstream culture, conjures. So a pernicious culture that, if not vigorously resisted, will make you comfortably numb and an inevitable candidate for the gathering Satan army. All right, that was long, but that was the end of the additional aside on language. And I'll just say, thank you for your patience. This is very repetitious to me, this theme of the mashup language, but Jesus is reiterating it in so many different episodes. And one thing it does is it helps me understand that I will roll differently than other people. And each person has to roll differently than their mom and dad, than their brother or sister. And sometimes some people are called to roll way differently, and that's me. And so their understandings, and the words they use, the things they do, um, may be dramatically different. And I'm learning to be okay with that. So all the reinforcements are for me to simply be okay with, when I'm doing street preaching and telling people about spirit possession, that even feels foreign to my tongue. I mean, even though I've been talking about it for some time. And so when people's eyes start rolling or they start wagging their fingers, what you're saying is wrong, I will be in a position where I can look at charity with them and understand that they have a different language of understanding, and that's what they're called to. I don't have to criticize it and say, you got old-fashioned language. You need to call it what I call it. Not at all. I have no idea. I'm not Jesus. I don't know what people need. And so that's why this episode that talks about two possessed armies are now assembling, I don't know how he assembles all those. I don't know how these two armies are going to be assembled, but I'm being given hints to it, and that's kind of what we're exploring. And I can only kind of take my own experience and like, what are you doing to me, Jesus? It seems like this is way different than I throughout my life, but what I'm experiencing is more guidance. It's not totally. I've received God's guidance throughout my life. Now it's acknowledging it and now saying it uh, boldly. Yep, Jesus told me to write this. Jesus told me to write that. I am such a blatant Jesus follower, but he makes me that way. Why are you so blatant, Greg? We all know that Jesus influences things. I don't go light. Jesus, and he's like, why? Jesus has me not go light because he's called me to do these things in a bold way, and I think it's so that I can lead by example. Okay, that's probably enough there. I'm going to ask Jonathan if he has anything before I dive into the last part of this.
Um, there is something that I think I'll talk to you about when after we finish today.
Sounds good.
You're talking about how it's often the same, and I've had some thoughts about how we might be able to really have it be different. And it's by looking at other things and other stories. I sent you an email kind of talking about that.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I liked it. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes there's often a theme. It's like I watched a video yesterday, and they mentioned a series on television that lasted for I think 14 seasons or 15 seasons. And I never saw the series, but I guess it was very popular, and it while it was about a particular, like it had different things that happened, there was a theme throughout it. And you can take a theme and reiterate on it thousands of times by telling a different story every time you talk about it. So what I think might be, I guess I am telling you, what might be cool is to do some episodes where we focus on a different story, because the stories are always different. Like you can talk about faith from now. I mean, you look at Hollywood and it's one big story of the hero's theme. They're telling the same story, the same few stories over and over and over again. And so I would really enjoy that. Let's talk about it afterwards, but
yeah, no, I like it.
I wonder if that's the way to talk about it, but not, just say the same things over and over. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I like that because it is actually part of WakeNOsis to me. There's a website you can go to. It's called Tropes, and they will use what's called tropes. It's like repetitive, underlying themes and actually statements that people know, and so they hook you by your almost unconscious understandings of phrases and so forth. If you grow up like in the English language, they know how to do this, and so they can use these as like little placeholders, and they can say things, say much, because you've already got a story that's kind of written out to that trope. So they use these tropes, series of tropes, and this website basically pays attention to these tropes and will lay it out. It's very interesting. But why it's interesting to me in relationship to this is because that's how we're able to become hypnotized by the devil, because we can we develop over time through our society, through all these different layerings. Because Babylon's composed this way. You think God's the only one that talks in mashup language? No, the devil does. And so as he's building an antichrist society, which he is, the devil is actively building one of the biggest, most powerful antichrist societies that has ever existed. And most people's experience in that culture, are they horrified? No. It was the fear of the prophets anciently that they would say, you know what, really, all is well, everything's okay. They wouldn't be like, I got to get out of here, I got to flee Babylon. They would just like, no, there's a few things wrong. They're not like fundamentally, there's fundamental evil here. And so he's built a society that is very dark, very distracting, away from Christ. So once again, nothing matters but Christ. All right. And so if he can distract you away, then he's got a powerful thing. No matter how churchy it is, if it can be churchy and pretty much take you away from talking of Christ always, preaching of Christ, prophesying of Christ, he doesn't want that culture. That's a Jesus culture. And so if he can have you do other things, of necessity, we'll have to do this work. And of necessity, I have to relax from work. And so he'll set up entertainments and so forth that are beautiful distractions, like a hypnotist might be able to do, until you're in this state and you go from one activity to the next, and you haven't talked to Christ. I didn't say anything about Jesus. No, I didn't today. And now you're actually kind of voicing what the devil would say. I don't want you saying anything about Jesus. All right. But we can talk about light and truth. And as long as he can keep you away from the main source, and he doesn't have to hear hashtag hear him Jesus. I even have go ahead, Jonathan. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that it would be cool. We'll see how this pans out. So one of the things that people will often struggle about when it comes to religious language is that it's not their language. And, you know, there's people who they will hear a religious word and it will immediately put them off.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems with language. And that's why maybe it's good that you and I are both been kind of doing this, because I feel like in a way it's like you stand on one end and I stand on like a balancing end.
Yeah.
In a sense, because it's like, you know, you have a consistent, constant focus on the idea that this is Jesus.
Yeah.
That is, and I actually agree that you know, my personal views are that Christ stands at the head of this earth, that he is, I resonate with most of the things that you say. However, like I know that there are people who bristle at the very mention of his name. And I don't think that it's because they necessarily, it's because for so many people, it's just a word. It's just a way to prove that I'm right and that you're wrong.
Right.
You know, it's like so many people, it's like I've run into people who are very mainstream Christian, and they they're very insistent about this idea that um, uh, it's like they believe that they have found Christ because they know his name.
Right,
Does
right.
that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, that's
It's
right.
almost like, yeah, they believe that they have found Christ because they can chant the right mantra.
Yeah, yeah,
Does that make sense? They draw
sure.
near with the lips, but
Yeah,
their hearts are far away.
yeah,
And so one thing that I think will be cool, what might be cool if it goes this way, is that it's like, I kind of wonder if what people long for is they long for someone to look at what they are looking at. Like, like they're looking out at the world, they have experiences with this particular brand of coffee, and this ad that they saw here, and um this movie they saw, or this story they've heard their whole lives, and what they really what would be what they long for is for someone to look at it with them, not to turn their eyes towards them and say, change your view, and think like me. They need them to turn like this and look with them at what they're looking at and say, hey, have you noticed this and this? And give some meaning to what they're looking at.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Let me comment quickly on this.
go ahead.
Okay, because that's the spirit that Jesus gave me. I am uh, um, personally, I'm drawn to so many different things. I'm very comfortable with people who others are like, that's not a holy person. So I have people that are kind of conventional, traditional religionists that are, focused on the Lord. That's what they'd say, or Jesus. And they would bristle at some of the friendships I have that are really way out there. Like I've got a friend that when I'm around him, I'll say the creator. And that's who he calls God. And his understanding of God just has a different name, but I think has a different conception as well. So I have no problem stretching out there. You go, well, yeah, but Greg, you're all Jesus-y. Well, yeah, because that's what I'm called to. Build a world, and it has a name, and the name is Jesus. Well, could it be a Lord world? Yeah, that'd be a different world. And that's what like in my LDS background, that's right now the world that personal world that people are used to with the language. General authorities as well. They'll say the Lord did this. They don't say Jesus. That sounds evangelical. My evangelical brothers and sisters go like, that's the world we live in, where praise Jesus. And they have an evangelical way about it. And within our LDS culture, this is the bad part of our culture. We've kind of within our culture thought, well, that's not the right way. You're going the wrong way. And so, not surprising that not everyone, but a lot of LDS, if you stuck them in a Holy Rollers church, they'd think this isn't the right. And I've heard them like in Sunday school. I went to that church. I didn't feel the Spirit. Well, the funny thing is, I did. I'm like, whoo, I'm feeling the Spirit. But I feel it in a Catholic church, that's kind of more like Mormon in terms of tone and so forth. I can range that. So God has put me in a very wide range. I'll tell you about that wide range. To honor, I've got a friend who's Muslim, and I speak of Jesus as Allah. I'll say, yeah, so what's Allah having you do? In my mind, I just translate it. I'm like, yeah, there's one God, his name's Jesus. Of course, I believe in Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, 3 separate individuals, but that's all details, okay? The devil's in the details. Let's not fight about that. Instead, let's just get on the same page. We know there's somebody guiding us. I like to call him Jesus. You like to call him Allah, and you think Allah is real. And actually, the Muslims also believe Jesus is real, just a prophet. Okay, so Jesus took me to a Muslim celebration. It's called Ramadan. I think it's like in March or something. For a whole month, they fast. Well, I'm very excited to tell you that Jesus, starting January 1st through January 31st, there's a new Christian celebration. It's called Jesus Dawn. It's not Ramadan. It's Jesus Dawn, D-A-W-N, the dawn of Jesus. And that's where I'll be joining with my brothers and sisters, which mostly may be angels this year. But every year we're going to do Jesus Dawn. And And what is that? It's just what Jonathan's saying. Hey, look at what we're doing. Hey, I'm looking what you all the people are doing. And I like that. And because I went to the Ramadan celebration with my wife, because they were inviting us on the radio when I was at college. And I thought, free ethnic food, they're feeding us? Cool. We went there and they separated my wife and I. She didn't know what this was about, nor did I. So she's over there with the women. I'm over with the men. They have us do this praying on our knees, which I thought was cool. Like, yeah, this is different. And because I had to kind of ask myself, is this okay? God, is this okay? That I don't want to be worshiping the devil, which I thought was, that's just a little kid inside my head. But what he was training to me to do is to be a bridge to other people, between the LDS people and other people, because I'm very comfortable. Like, the Jim Bridger, I can go talk to the Indians. I'm comfortable. They're not going to kill me. Those ones would kill you. And so and that's what he's told me. I don't know. I already am a bridge, but how he uses me, I don't know. But there'll be many bridges between the different faiths. But what I'm telling you is, yes, I like your spirit, Jonathan. And I'm glad that you have that, because this gives a more of a balance to these Jesus TV shows, because I'm imbalanced. Jesus, I'm all in on Jesus, and it's a Jesus world. And what I want, I invited my friend, make an Allah world. I want there to be an Allah world so I can go visit the Allah world. Well, you say, well, there kind of is, right? When I went to Ramadan, I was entering into somebody else's world. And that's where we're going, is we're going to go where people create their world. They have their gathering, and it's like going to Burning Man. If you go to Burning Man, there's all kinds of different people, and they're all there unified by kind of a general thing, free expression and love. There's just certain rules, but you have Christians over here, evangelical Christians. You have people who want to see women with tassels over here, different sections of, but guess what that's like? The promised land, America, where people live in harmony, and it reflects something fundamental that we want as human beings and children of God, to allow all men to worship God however they choose. If it's with tassels, on their breasts, if it's and then to have this room space, like, well, if you're going to do your orgies, then I think I'm going to be on the other side, and you don't have to fight. You just say, there's these different kingdom approximations, and we learn to go visit. So come on over for pancakes in the morning, and you go visit. You try to respect their area, and so you have this community. I've never been to Burning Man. My friend who worships the Creator, that's what he calls him. We worship one God, Allah, Jesus, but I call him Jesus. And I'm comfortable with that. A lot of people aren't. That's fine. Jesus leads people. And so I like that you have that same comfort. And Jonathan, in these episodes, will continually reach out in language to others and say, yeah, no, so this is how Greg and I are talking about this, but this is cool. And we're just trying to do that. And I approve of that. It's just simply, that's not my mission. My mission's all Jesus, 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 Jesus. And it thereby leaves even my faith tradition, my Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it kind of leaves them. You're like, Greg, you left us. I didn't. I go to their meetings because Jesus tells me to. He tells me, Greg, it's the only true church upon the face of the earth, as it says in Doctrine and Covenants 129. It's led by dirty, filthy, rotten, hard-hearted, hopeful sinners like yourself, who are mortals, who are prophets and apostles, but once again, and so I've left the reservation in terms of the language I use. I'm doing, when Nephi killed somebody because God told him to, do you think he was leaving the reservation? Believe me, who he killed was a religious person. And so God will do that. He will lead. Okay, go ahead, Jonathan. Sorry, that's a lot of words.
It's all right. Well, what occurs to me is that I wonder if the road out of this is how do I put it? To look. So I have to explain what I mean by that. And that is, it's like every framework of belief has within it truths. You could say they're like pillars that hold up the building. And then next to those pillars, you could call them false pillars. So in a structure, you can have certain pillars which are actually holding up the roof and other ones that are just there for show.
Yes.
And so the false pillars are things which are false within that framework. And they are things which oftentimes I found that those false pillars are things which don't really point the people toward the divine. They are aspects of that they are things that hold together the organization. So like I'm tempted to say one and then I'll offend somebody.
Well,
But
I can tell you one, ways in which you organize, for instance, Sunday school, that you may inherit from your cultural tradition, didactic instruction. It may not be the best instruction, because what you'll later find out that your secular institutions through Jesus start recognizing that there's differential learning, what's called differential learning styles. But your religious organization, which might have beautiful true pillars, may still have a pillar they haven't addressed, which is the false pillar, which is every one size fits everybody, because that's what basically public education is still stuck on, is that they're not attending to the kinetic learners, for instance, learning math kinetically. No, book learning is the dominant style. So you have these traditions of the fathers that stick you in a certain way. And because having something else, a different pillar that's more true to the students, like self-directed learning. Not everybody, because you just keep going through the math lessons and you leave people behind. And they know that, they know it, but they have to move on. But they're structured in a way that requires them to move on, even if people haven't mastered things. Well, guess what? That's what I hear oftentimes in Sunday school lessons. They'll say, well, we've got a lot to cover, and when I used to talk in church, I would slow them down because I'd have questions. I needed a Jesus TV where we could stop and talk about it. And you say, well, that would require you to have like one-on-one discussions, like in the hallway. Oh, that's where some of my best discussions are. Well, we can't have everybody do that. Well, that's not necessarily true. So there will be better ways that 100 years from now, like, why didn't we do that? And the answer is because that pillar that you're speaking of, it's hard to put a new pillar in there when it's still holding up because it's working. I mean, that's its biggest problem. You know what the biggest problem with the tall and spacious building is? Meaning Babylon? It's working. and that's
Kinda.
a problem.
The reason I mentioned that is that, well, before I get to the reason, I am going to give a couple of examples, and I don't think I'll offend anybody. You were talking about tassels,
Yes.
and so I know that there are ancient religions which, sexual promiscuity was part of worshiping God.
Yeah.
And so that's a twisting of something good. Obviously, it's good to have sexual intercourse in marriage. It creates a beautiful thing. And so that could be a false pillar. I'll give you another one. The leader of our religion is infallible.
Right.
So this is not a pillar that holds up the building at all.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you following me? Like,
yeah,
this
sure.
doesn't help anybody to get to God.
No.
And, the leader of our organization is infallible. He will never say or do anything that could possibly be wrong, or, and you can even go a step further. And those who disagree with him, we're going to poke out their eyes with hot pokers.
Right. Right.
And then burn them at the stake.
Yeah.
Like, this pillar is not worth, like it's a pillar and they consider it to be the gospel truth,
Yeah.
like, that our leader, whatever he says is the truth. And it's like, and those those who are listening, who have been in an organization who believes that, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yeah,
Of course,
and
nowadays we don't poke out people's eyes with hot pokers. Thank God.
yeah,
We've gotten beyond that.
yeah.
But there are these false pillars. So here's the fascinating thing. I think it would be fun. So what did Christ say? Christ said, well, I am the truth, I am the way, and I am the life. Now, a lot of people, what they take that to mean is that if I believe in Jesus, that's the only truth that matters, is to believe that Jesus is the Christ. But I don't think I think that's only one part of the explanation. The other part is that wherever you find truth, anywhere, guess what you found?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Yep.
Now, and then and of course, in the best sense of, let's say, the Muslim religion, for those who are in tune with the Spirit of God, and who don't buy into the false pillars within their own faith, they would say they're looking for, they call him Allah, you know.
Yeah.
And the fascinating thing that would be is, I wonder if the connection. So what I said in a minute ago is that I wonder if the key is to look. I would love it. I think it would be fun to sit down and to pick a particular story or a trope or a person from some other framework, from some other, and listen to this story. And what are we going to look for, you and I, as we do it, or whoever your guest is, whatever. It's like, okay, well, what we're looking for is the truth.
Yeah.
And what do we see out of this? And so we're looking at with the world, those who are watching with us, we're like, hey, look at this with us. And we're saying, where can we find the truth? And secretly, what are you looking for? Of course, what Greg is going to say, well, yeah, I'm really looking for Jesus
Yeah.
in this,
Right.
right?
That's right.
But there may be somebody listening who it's like, well, I'm not sold on that because, I was raised by, a Baptist or a Mormon, leader who beat me every third Tuesday, and I don't want to hear the word Jesus. I don't care to hear
Yeah.
it till I die.
Yeah.
I'm not to a place where I can accept that, but I would love to sit and look at it with you and see if we can't find the truth together. And in time, I trust that if the truth really is synonymous with Jesus, that whatever that higher power is, that he'll show that to me. And we're saying the same thing, right? As we're looking at these different aspects of things, and we're saying, you know what? Yeah, us too. Like, in other words, we're not convinced that everything we know is right. We are looking for the truth, and we're willing to have that higher power tear down our false pillars in the pursuit of truth, which
Yeah.
in our
God.
hearts we know is synonymous with Jesus, because Jesus has aligned himself with truth. And what are we trying to do? Be one with Jesus and align ourselves with truth.
Yeah.
Go
That's
ahead.
right. Well, I like it. And it calls to mind one reason Jesus might be doing what he does with me is because even in my own family, I have a different language now. I mean, like my wider family, I'm sure they see some of these episodes, they sneak on and look at it. They're not going to like it or whatever, but they would not want to engage me because I'm like engaging with an evangelical, and we're going to have disagreements. But they also know that I'm pretty clever, and Jesus has made me clever. That do you want to deny that a spirit can possess our bodies? Do you want to go there? And the answer is no, because they would know it's scriptural. And they would know it's true, but they would also know that's not conventional language. And so oftentimes what they've done to dismiss me is to say, oh, you're basically talking about the same thing. And the truth is I am, but I love that they dismiss me because, yeah, guess what? We don't have to have the same language. Article Faith 11. And so even in households, and so, and I know sociologically, sometimes having the same language brings people closer, makes them feel unified. And so it is kind of divisive to start using a different language. I've mentioned before that in my elders quorum, one of the leaders in the elders quorum came to me privately and kind of humbly said, somebody's saying in the elders quorum that you're saying the word Jesus too much. They feel like it's taking the Lord's name in vain. And so for them, I was breaking with the herd. And and I think that person would know that I'm not breaking any commandment, that it would be very hard to pull a church court together. They're saying I'm doing something wrong. They would have a hard time convincing 50% of the members that Greg says Jesus too much. In fact, some of them would be blown away. You're complaining that Jesus, Greg, let me hear what he said. And if they listen very carefully, they go, no, I could see where you're going, that Greg kind of has a boisterousness that seems unholy, irreverent, but he's right. He kind of does have a different worship style. And if that's where Jesus is leading him, so fair-minded people would come to that conclusion. But I actually felt compassion for this person, and I don't know who they are, but I just smile every time, because they were a cultural lightning rod. They showed me where we are in the Jesus movement. And I just smiled because I knew 20 years from now, 30 years from now, the name Jesus is going to be said a whole lot more than it ever was in me growing up in the LDS church. The pendulum is swinging, but I'm a forerunner. And so I'm a living representative of what's coming, that just as my family has had to get used to my different language. Jesus told me this, Jesus told me that. We're going to have some Jesus bread. I'm having a Jesus carrot. Believe me, my immediate family's comfortable with that. You can get used to it. When we usually just call them carrots. Dad calls them Jesus carrots, right? And so that's the thing, is if you give space where you can live in the space, then and honestly, I'm comfortable with atheists, with everybody. But Jesus has had me on a divine chicane my whole life of curiosity. I've gone to Muslims, I've gone to Jewish churches, I've gone to Baptist churches with an open heart. And I'm like, oh, what do you conclude? They're all trying to do the best they can. And like Jonathan says, they got truth. I'm seeing truth there, so go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I was just going to say, I was just realizing that I apologize that I've kind of diverted you a little bit off of where you're
we're actually
going.
getting it. We only have like a paragraph left, and you'll see we're nailing
Okay.
it.
I knew we were talking about Nephi at one point. I was like, oh no, we never got to that. So we can cover that next time, I guess, but go ahead.
No, because what Jonathan and I are talking about is how these armies will gather. And I'm particularly interested in how God's army will gather, because I intend to be in that army. I am actually in that army, and I'm documenting how he's gathering me. So these things we've been talking about, he will gather us with language. There'll be certain language that will start. In the beginning was the word. Well, in the gathering was the word. The people start hearing other people talk of Christ, preach of Christ, and you'll start having these people who do that. But then you say, well, so only Jesus people? No. Jonathan hit the nail on the head. It's truth. So what you're going to see, and this is the gathering, they will become lovers of a lie, or lovers of truth at any cost. And that's going to be the distinguishing factor, is because it's nice to have people lie to you when you just, you need a little comfort, and they just lied to you. Greg, you're the handsomest man I know. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Are you saying that with little quotes around it and so forth? But we see it right now. We live in a culture where people, I saw this statement, we know they're lying. They know that we know they're lying, and yet they continue to lie. And I'm like, yep, that's right. We've come to a point in history where people are lying to you, like on TV, and they know that they're lying, but yet they'll keep lying, even in the face of that, because they've become lovers of the lie. Because they have and you're like, why would somebody love a lie? Because it keeps them in power. It's how they want to view the world. They know, like, because I'll tell you what came. I'll give you this talking stick back. When you talk about Nephi, how would he explain his blood? And in my mind, I'd say, well, today he'd just say he's having his man period. And anyone who's studied what's going on right now, men can have periods, men can have babies. Well, that's a lie, but it's taken, but it's an imagination. It's like a vain imagination. But it's it feeds some people because of what, you know, and I'm not trying to poke fun at anybody, whatever their sexual orientation, but that's what came to my mind is like, oh, I'm having my man period, but it's a lie society where we're going to have a lot of weird stuff being put forth, and that's, anyways, that's the distinguishing characteristics, is they'll love a lie. Go ahead.
Because it serves us.
Yeah.
It serves us. It serves us in some way. Yeah, and we could go into that, but it would be a whole discussion. It's like people are desperately believing the lie because they want this society, this social structure, this technology and everything. They want it to hold together desperately. And so they'll believe anything they're told just to keep it going.
Yes, it's held together by lies, and that's why it's going to fall. Is basically it's held together by lies and truth, just like I am. We're all sinners, so we all have lies and untruths within us, and so it's like eating bad food. You can eat bad food as long as you're eating some good food, and it's not too bad of food. Like I'm eating gasoline sandwiches, frozen gasoline. Well, that's a lie. Oh no, these are healthy for you. That's a lie that's just so too far from the truth that it'll take you quick. But if you say, I'm eating 5 Big Macs for each meal, that one won't take you quick. That one, you may live, I think you're going to shorten your life, maybe you probably shorten your life by 20 years or something like that. And it'll make it miserable, but because there's still some truth in there. There's still some nutrients your body needs and so forth. And so that's just, it's kind of like a tipping point, but it's also when God decides to let it fall. Go ahead, Jonathan, if you had a thought.
No, I said, you said you had one paragraph. Maybe I'll let you read
here,
it.
Jonathan and I will discuss improv style, the two gathering armies and the respective type of spirit possession they'll employ, comparing and contrasting their respective recruitment strategies. And I don't feel to go into that. I think we'll discuss those things in other episodes. In my mind, just understanding that there's a movement going on right now, and that you'll be able to see this. I think about the time Jesus is going to come, you'll find that there's going to be two armies, and one army is not going to be really in the battle. You're like, well, what are you talking about? Because there's going to be two armies. Actually, you say, well, then there's three armies. True. The devil will have two armies, and they're going to kill each other. They're both possessed, and they're possessed by fear, anger, lust, and they will stay away from this other army, this third army. And what's that army called? The army of God. And they'll stay away because they are lovers of the truth, and they will be given truths by God. You could call them technologies. And you see that throughout the Book of Mormon, technologies like Jesus, through his spirit, telling people of God, hey, when you go to war, put some breastplates on. I don't know what they made these out of. Could have been metal, could have been wood or something. But the people they were going against, who were not filled by that spirit, didn't get the message. And so when they went to war, a whole much more of the evil people got killed because they didn't have breastplates. And so God would bless his children with certain understandings, and that's why, of course, he'll do things like that. So there's deniability. So the people who are not the army of God, the army of the devil, will say, well, you just survived so well. It's not because you're God. It's because you had that breastplate. and they're right. 100% right, but also 100% wrong. Who do you think told us about the breastplates? And so God will deliver his people, like Moses did. Yeah, you guys just got away because there was a lot of frogs and lice, and you had that guy, and so we'll compare and contrast how God will employ these. We can bring scriptures in to describe how one acts when possessed by a dark, hypnotized spirit of the devil. So that's what I was going to emphasize, different ways in which people, when they're possessed of the devil or a good portion of the devil's spirit, they'll act in certain ways, hypnotized ways. And we just talked about a very important one. They'll deny the truth, like they're asleep to it. And contrast that with WakeNOsis and hypnotizing spirit of Christ, dehypnotizing spirit of Christ, where you awaken to the truth. You awaken, for instance, to your awful state. There's people that I'm using prophetic language. I think it's in the Doctrine and Covenants that God's saying, no, it's actually the Book of Mormon. Awaken no, it is the Doctrine and Covenants, where God says that we need to awaken to our awful state, but before the world gets above us. And that's already happened. That basically, in large measure, the devil's winning. He's not going to win the war, but he's got he's above us, and there's no escape. It's like we're in Egypt, and Pharaoh's already got us all there. We're all slaves. We can still practice our religion. You could do that too, but you're slaves. And so, in a large measure, our culture has us in its grasp now. That's how I think that we're toast. We have to buy and sell. Jonathan has to go to Walmart or a Walmart approximation. No more gardening for him. It doesn't make sense anymore. It would have, but go try to grow your own tomatoes, and you're going to end up spending more money than you would otherwise. It's just better. You might just go get a job and get your tomatoes. So if you run out of tomatoes in California, you're toast, because you haven't been doing that. And so we've set up systems that keep us in a state of bondage, and those have to be broken by God before we can all produce our own food and so forth. And it'll have to be done as a collective, like the pioneers and so forth. So, but we're asleep to it. We don't even wake up and say, "Oh, we need to do that. We need to do our, have our own garden." And the church doesn't emphasize it, not because they're asleep. Their people won't do it, and it's no longer reliable and advisable. They can give lip service to it, but when you could go buy a can of beans cheaper than you can make them, it's like, what idiots are going to go grow them? Well, there might be some really good idiots who are preparing, and there are. The truth is, there's people right now, and I'm one of them. I'm like, I think I'm supposed to go plant winter wheat to practice, not because we need it next year. So I'm going to go plant some winter wheat to see how it grows. How can we harvest this? And why are you doing that? Because that spirit tells me, go do this. And I'm going to try not to resist it, because I don't want to plant winter wheat. But if that's what the spirit wants me to do, and then I will. And it could be just so that it's an exercise. He's just taking me through, will Greg do something that he doesn't think is very profitable? I don't have any wheat harvesting equipment, but maybe, I only see a little plot and have some experience with it. Maybe it's so I can talk about it, and somebody else goes, I'm going to do a whole 40 acres. Then I'll be buying wheat from them. Well, this was my idea. No, it wasn't. It was God's idea. So what I'm trying to point to here, in relationship to WakeNOsis, is that God is having people do things right now that they're kind of unaware of the strategic value of it. They're going like Nephi, not knowing beforehand. Well, that's a form of WakeNOsis, or dehypnotizing. You're being led by a spirit, and if you don't know beforehand the things which you should do, sometimes you don't know why you're doing them. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know how this has to do with anything, what's coming. And I've been doing that for some time. Jonathan too. Jonathan's in a van, living in a van. And it's that spirit that I'm speaking of, that where you surrender to a voice that's kind of like part of your unconscious. And once you start going there, I'm going to start thinking, well, that sounds like spirit possession to me. And then scripturally, it just lines up that we ask that thy spirit be what? With us. We take the sacrament that his spirit might always be with us. And so it's like, okay, so are we saying that we want to be influenced by that spirit? Bingo. And so if it is on one hand, then what's on the other hand? And then, so I'm talking about these armies assembling, and that's what God wants me to have eyes to say, can you see them assemble, Greg? And I can see some of the processes, and I don't know that I'll be able to see these armies assembling, but I do believe they are. And that adds some drama to my life. It's like, because I've started gathering certain people. Jonathan's one of them. Like how Jonathan and I met. Like, and we don't try to force the relationship. It's just, here we are on Jesus TV. I came to get potatoes, okay? His wife listed some potatoes. They had some potatoes. And I said, well, you take $10 for like a bag of potatoes. And she said, no. And like, okay. So that was fine. It was just, and then a couple of weeks later, she said, hey, do you still want some potatoes? And she said, you have them for free. Probably they were starting to go to seed. So I went over, knocked on their door, and Ashley opened the door, and I met Jonathan. We sat in the car talking for probably 3 hours. Our first unrecorded episode of Jesus TV. That'd be fun if, well, it is recorded by Jesus, but it'd be fun to have that so people could, we were getting to know one another, and then we've been entangled. Keep calling it entanglement, that God will entangle me with the people that, and I don't know what comes of it. Just like with Jonathan, like we're trying to figure out, okay, I see we're together, and we just play out the next card. And so like, why am I on Jesus TV with Jonathan? Because he's very insightful. So I've had, we've done episodes on poetry and prophecy, because he has poetic and prophetic poems that Jesus has been saying very similar things to him as me, but he has more. There's more than just what Jesus has told me. And so as I'm reading those poems, Jesus is layering new understandings upon me. And actually they result in, like, Jonathan used that term in one of your poems. Jesus had you use the term suffer well. That's become its own television program. And so I wasn't expecting that, but it's been a very good, and that theme, that television program has been very informative for my mind, to understand something simply. We're all here, we're all going to suffer. There's two different ways you can suffer miserably, or suffer well, or suffer better. And are you, and well, how do you suffer better? How do you suffer more well? Well, that's what the television program's exploring. So I'm learning those things as my viewers are learning them, and then trying to apply them. So that's, oh, Jonathan, yeah, there was something Jesus added. Say anything you want, because I'm going to do this next section. I forgot he added something here. But let me do this paragraph. Jesus, where Jesus wants my heart and mind is to be prepared to receive more of his spirit, and to understand the nature of altered state of consciousness that Nephi had on his third trip to get the plates, and to get used to it. Get used to different, get used to evoking and experiencing that level of symbiotic possession. So part of the thing I have to do is that generally I wasn't, I've been led by God, but he wants me to be able to take higher and higher states of that symbiotic possession, where I yield myself to him, and I'm more like a puppet. And believe me, that's how he's had me. I'll go do things like, I don't know why I'm here. And I'll ask him, why am I here? The other day, like doing this junk, and I don't feel good. It feels like somebody's taking advantage of me. Am I the junk man? And Jesus spoke to me like, no, it's good. And then I was happy, like, okay, good. I don't have to understand what we're doing. I just needed to make sure that this is what we're supposed to do. And so I'm learning to not resist Jesus's spirit, especially when the end of days, Matthew 24-ish pressure comes. So that's what I get, is that Jesus says, there's this time coming, and I need you to be highly nimble and do what I tell you to do at a high level. So yes, I've been guided by God before I was born again, and I can see that, I can trace it back. but the level at which he's having me do it now is starting to approach the Nephi level, where it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, and the things he's having me do just don't make much sense. And my wife could attest to that. And I was like, why are you doing that, Greg? I don't know, but I know I'm supposed to. And getting used to that is a very important thing. Okay, Jonathan, I do have to have this talking stick one more time, but I want to turn it back over to you. See if you have anything to say with what I've said so far.
Well, I thought about the idea of going into the Nephi story, but I think it would be its own discussion. So I almost wonder if we should, I don't know if we'll actually do that story or not, but we could do another story too. But I think it would be cool to look at the different parts of it. But I kind of have the feeling, it's like, I know we're already running kind of long on this one. I wonder if you want to finish what you have, and then let's maybe plan a different time when we can go through that story or through another story. And I like,
yeah, I like your idea. Jonathan had suggested going through some fiction and nonfiction stories. And in fact, when you're saying, well, this is nonfiction, and there's a part of me, so we have our beliefs and we have our unbeliefs. So I'm comfortable saying, yeah, you know what, the Nephi story that Jonathan shared, guess what it is? It's nonfiction and fiction. What? Yeah, it's nonfiction and fiction. So I got one bag, it's my beliefs, and I believe it. Like, so it's nonfiction. That thing really happened. And then I got another bag over here that Jesus has me carry throughout my life. And I say, oh, help my unbelief, Lord, because inside this bag, that's fiction. That's just made up stuff. And like, well, Greg, how long halt you between two opinions? As long as Jesus has me alive, I will believe in Jesus and I'll unsow unbelief. And so a very important thing is to ask Jesus to help our unbelief, lighten that load. Give us some, go ahead, Jonathan.
just the thing that's strange about it, that's interesting, is that how much importance people put on whether it's fiction or nonfiction.
Right.
It's like, if someone were to tell me, come look at this, John, come look, see this barrel right here. And I look at it, and I see a barrel, and inside of it, it's full of water. And he says, I can look in this barrel and I can reach inside. And if I imagine it, I can pull out anything I want. And I say, really? Really? Huh? I don't believe you, you know? And then he says, watch. And he looks into it, and then he closes his eyes and he imagines, and he reaches inside and he pulls out a gold nugget. Okay. It's like, that's what I think when people say stuff like this. They do the same thing with the Bible, and that's fine if they do that with the Bible. It's like, they say this has got to be fiction. And it's like, okay, fine, but what do you do with the fact that it's a gold nugget?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So it's fiction, but that story is so deep and profound. Like, it doesn't matter to me it does matter, like, because I actually think Abraham's one of my ancestors, and I love that.
Yeah.
So I want it to be nonfiction. I fully no, this has got to be nonfiction. That's what goes through my mind most of the time. But like you say, there's that little thing there. It's like, well, Jonathan, what if it's fiction? And I go, well, that's some pretty damn good fiction.
Right. Yeah. In fact, give me that placebo. If that placebo,
yes,
you're just eating a sugar pill. Yeah, but it's decreasing I can see on the scan, it's decreasing my tumor. And you keep eating the sugar pill, and then it's gone. Well, then you've just embraced a lie that worked. And so God said, by your fruits ye shall know them. And so he's put us on earth to walk by faith, which is not knowing beforehand, but it's also having hope in something that is true, but is unseen. And so that's the nature of it. And so the things that I talk about are to become comfortable with that, because that's what I have to do. I fundamentally have to disregard my unbelief, because it's there. Okay. I carry it every day. And I have to basically learn to trust God, even though I can't see how what you're doing, God, is going to put milk on the table and bread. Okay. And reasonable people would agree. No, I think Greg's gone too far, but I will do things that I'm expecting a miracle. And I'm expecting kind of miracles that even my fellow religion people would say, no, you do have to do some work. God expects us to do work. I hear him say, don't to do this. Now, are you going to tell me don't do what God tells me to do? And like, well, maybe you're hearing him wrong. All of a sudden, I've turned into Job. You don't hear God, and it cooks my noodle, because I'm like, guys, it's already hard to follow God. Now you're going to pile on, and of course, those people don't talk to me. Those are the people in my brain, because I have to imagine those conversations. Job actually had friends that would talk to him. Most of my friends, other than Jonathan will just encourage me in Christ. But yeah, a lot of my friends just that they wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing because it does not make sense. And I would admit it. I go like, I got a PhD. I'm good at thinking, and I know it doesn't make sense, but here's what I'm doing. And a lot of times I don't have the gold nugget to show them. I say, it's coming. Oh, sure it is. No, it's coming. And I can't tell them whether it's coming this month or when I die. Oh, that's the trick, is because Jesus, some of the things he'll give you what I promised, and you die without that being fulfilled. Well, then that's where you're believing in things that aren't even fulfilled, so that other mortals can bow down to you and say, oh, I'm not worthy, Greg. You're so, and so it's hard to follow God and that's why this spirit possession is going to be so important, because the troubles we're going to be facing will require such a deep faith. But the troubles are actually going to produce deep faith for those who will, as Jonathan says, look to Christ or Allah, look to the truth no matter what, and then it will produce the fruit, especially under pressure. That's the thing. And any entrepreneur will tell you, when it's getting really, the going's getting really rough, not any entrepreneur, the successful entrepreneurs, their breakthroughs come when everything seems to just be failing, and all of a sudden, because they stayed with it, boom, they got the sale, it closed. And so there's a principle of faith that operates whether you're a Jesus believer or atheist. God loves all of his children. So go ahead, Jonathan. I saw you had something.
I lost it, but it was long. I think I was agreeing with something you said. I had something about it, but that's okay. How did you actually get through the rest of your thing, or should you need to finish
No, this one's a good one that Jesus added. So I'm going to read this very fast,
Okay.
because it actually gets to what, and I would like to do that, read the Nephi one and revisit this sometime. But this
Yeah.
actually, Jesus tagged this on the end for a reason. Because we have, you're like, what does it feel like? Greg, you keep talking about this spirit possession thing, like you kind of know what Nephi was feeling, or well, I don't know, but I'm exploring what that might be like, because I'm having similar experiences I describe in a similar way. I'm going forth not knowing. Well, there's and you say, well, there's religious terms that could actually explain some of that, and I'd agree, and that's what we're kind of exploring a little bit, and it could be explored more. But I'll tell you where some of these words I'm about to share with you, there's a secular understanding that that ties this really well together. When you're talking about WakeNOsis or dehypnotizing, getting in this state of consciousness where you're following God's spirit. And are there words that describe this? And there is, and it's called flow state. Okay. So I'm going to read you about this flow state. Gene Nakamura and somebody, I identify the following 6 factors as encompassing an experience of flow. So flow is a secular way in which to talk about what it's like to follow this spirit in kind of an unconscious, almost hypnotized like way. Intense and in focused concentration on the present moment, merging of action and awareness, a loss of reflective self-consciousness, a sense of personal control or agency over a situation or activity, a distortion of temporal experience as one's subjective experience of time is altered, which is very interesting. The sense of time is altered. Experience of the activity as intrinsically rewarding, also referred to as autoteletic experience. Those aspects can appear independently of each other, but not only independently, but only in combination as they do constant. Okay, those aspects can appear independently of each other, but only in combination do they constitute a so-called flow experience. So they're talking about this heightened state of alternative consciousness. Additionally, psychology writer Kendra Cherry has mentioned 3 other components as being part of the flow experience: immediate feedback, feeling the potential to succeed, feeling so engrossed in the experience that other needs become negligible. Just as with the conditions listed above, these conditions can be independent of one another. So I don't have much more to say that, but anyone who wants to, if you go to YouTube and you search what is flow, what is the state of flow, you'll see that you have musicians, you have athletes, individuals who get in a altered state of consciousness where it seems like they're not themselves, as though their life has gone away, and that they're now in the music, that they're playing the music and they're just unconscious of time. It seems to alter the sense of time anyways, and alter their sense of selfness. And at the most heightened level, I've had that. I had one experience when I was in the Atlanta airport. I was seeking this experience, and I remember that's what I was in. I was in a very heightened state of flow that I haven't matched since. I mean, it's not like I'm seeking this flow. I'm seeking God. And as I do, I'm finding that more and more, a lot of what he's having me do, like I say, it kind of feels hypnotic. And if people looked at my routines, they'd say, of course it does. It's like you're in some kind of Jesus cult, because I'm singing Jesus songs in a repetitious way. Every morning I sing the same songs. I did this morning as well. But it enters my mind into a Jesus world. And that's, I already told you, that's what I'm building. I'm building a Jesus world. And it's not going to just be this thing. It's going to be a feeling. It's going to be an altered conscious. And that's called an immersive state of consciousness. And that's what's coming to everyone, that artificial reality, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, augmented reality, the tools are being worked on right now by billionaires and corporations that will put you in a state that is more immersive than TV, more immersive than anything you've ever experienced. But what it'll be is it'll have its complement that you have probably experienced, some level of state of flow, some level of a state of spirit possession, just to go back to that, where you've felt God's spirit and you've felt to do things. That's a term that Jonathan will often use. I felt to do something. In other words, you're listening, like we said on that episode, hashtag hear him. It's like now you're listening with your heart. Well, what kind of thing is that? That sounds, I don't know, hypnotic related to me. It's like my heart's hearing things, and then I'm doing things based on what I hear in my heart. Okay, that's pretty much all I got. I feel like we've kind of scratched the surface a little bit, but it's sufficient to acknowledge that and to frame it within these 2 possessed armies. So that's kind of, we didn't speak a whole lot about those 2 possessed armies, but I think it was a dramatic way for Jesus to go bring that to my attention And it's probably just the first part of that he wants me to have eyes to see this within a frame that I'm familiar with, that there was a war in heaven and it came to earth, and the war's not over, and it's going to start looking I think it's going to look a lot more war and rumors of war, says the scriptures. So I think that war mindset, we've lived in a time of peace. If you lived during World War II, guess what? War would be on your mind a lot. Well, if war comes, I want to keep a not a New York state of mind. I want to keep a Jesus state of mind, and analyze and interpret things in relationship to infinite beings, God, his ability to deliver his people in the time of war. And so he's having me understand that there's a spiritual war going on, and a lot of people can see that, but that precedes the actual wars. Once people get possessed enough on the devil's side, they will come. They can't help themselves. And you see that Book of Mormon pattern. They'll start saying, "You guys screwed us over," and then they'll just come over and they'll come get what they think is rightfully theirs. But they have to generate enough of that spirit of the devil. They have to evoke that, and we're on that path. Wouldn't you agree, Jonathan, that in our culture, that's what Jesus shows us? We're on that path.
Yeah, and it's easier to fall prey than you think. So yeah, yeah, it's time to decide, like, do you want truth at all costs, or or do you want to keep believing whatever it is? It's
well,
like
and Jonathan's talking about this choice. So I think, what came to my mind, probably Jesus telling me, what we're talking about is getting on war footing. Have you ever heard that term, getting on war footing? That's when you, so for a while, the United States in World War II, they were not on war footing. They thought, oh, this is gonna, this will kind of blow over. Hitler, yeah, he took one country. He's not gonna go for the whole world. But same thing, like, so in Japan, bomb. So there's these events where you're like, okay, it's on. And now you start taking actions that you would never have taken until you do what's called getting on war footing. And so a lot of Christians right now and others of faith are getting on war footing spiritually. And like I say, winter wheat, maybe even more than spiritually. Go ahead.
And just this goes back to what you said before. It's like, okay, it's kind of that old song, who's on the Lord's side, who? Now is the time to show. It's like, it's not, I don't know how to put this. It's like, I find that many of my religious friends are getting ready to go to war, but think they're going to war on the Lord. And I fall and pray to this. Like, oh, I don't know how to put it. It's just, this is something probably for another episode. We'll have to really go into it sometime, but it's like, if you think you're going to fight, in other words, like if you have, it's a paradox, because it's like, if you have the war mentality, then you're on the wrong side. I don't even know how to put it. It's like, you're talking about being on war footing, and you're right. I'm actually agreeing with you. Like, but the way that you go to the war on the Lord's side is so antithetical to war itself.
Yeah.
That it's almost like, here's a better idea. There's this idea that Zion, or the city of God, let's call it that, the city of God always flees. This is a paradox, okay? It's like, what did Nephi do when everything was going wrong in the promised land and his brothers were going to kill him? What did they do? They fled. Okay.
Yep.
What did, there's the old saying that, like the city of Enoch, there was the saying for years afterwards that Zion fled. Okay.
Brigham Young fled.
Brigham Young fled. They're fleeing from place to place. And even so for those in Mormon land, it's like in the Doctrine and Covenants, there was this this point where he said, if your enemies come against you once and you withstand it, if they come against you twice, withstand it. If they come against you 3 times, then I will justify you in going to war against them. However, more blessed are you if you withstand it.
Right.
Okay, so now we're starting to see something. Okay, so and so there's this example in the Book of Mormon, of course, too, of and it's always been before us, the people of anti-Nephi Lehi. It's like we can do what the Nephites did for 1,000 years and fight 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 and fight. And that's what I see the conservatives doing. Is it's like, we're going to battle this. Of course, it's with words now. It's like we're going to have our own YouTube channel and tell them how they're all wrong and they're going to hell. And, and it's like, yeah, you can do that. You can do that forever. But it's like, or you can be the people of anti-Nephi Lehi who say, we are burying our weapons of war.
Yeah, that's right.
And when they come, we're going to kneel down and we're just going to let them kill us.
Yes. In fact, let me explain, because you're right. There's different interpretations of war footing, and that could easily be misinterpreted.
I think I'm actually 100% on board with you. I just want to clarify that one thing, that I think what you're saying is just that it's like those who are on the Lord's side are those who are going to suffer well and are going to be going out, right?
Yep, that's right. They will flee Babylon, and initially they'll do it spiritually, and so
that's how we fight.
Yeah, that's how we fight. We flee. Bye-bye, and which ultimately means you'll leave the culture behind. That through the power of Christ, He will separate father from son, mother from daughter, and meaning He will put in their heart, I'm going to live this way of the truth, and I'm not going to bow down to the traditions of the fathers, because that's what holds things together, these traditions of the fathers, even like bloodshed. It's just a tradition. This is traditionally how we solve our problems. And you go to a non-traditional, like a Gandhi, he was non-traditional. And so like my war footing is way non-traditional. Because I have this stirred up heart in Christ. And what's my answer? You go to www.getmorejesus. Well, it's right there. I'm getting ready for war by getting more Jesus. And you're like, Greg, you don't get ready for war by getting more Jesus. I know, right? But I intend to use in this war, Jesus says, you'll use the force. So you heard that in Star Wars, use the force, Luke. So any fighting I might do, I'm going to be using higher tech tools. And sometimes those tools are, you need to flee, you need to leave. And that's hard to leave. It's hard to leave a home behind, a way behind, friends behind, families behind. I have to get used to doing things that are emotionally difficult and that are against the culture. And that's hard because we're like sheep. And most people won't do it. The truth is, most people throughout the whole world are going to die. And the reason is because they can't change that quickly. It'll be too late. And it's okay. They're going to go to heaven. Anyways, one of the heavens. Go ahead, Jonathan.
What I was going to say is that, and you have to fight for that.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're getting to the war, is that it's like the time for being passive about this stuff.
Yes, there you go.
So far past.
Yeah.
Like you've got to fight to live in this place. Like it's like you've got to be serious about like, no, I'm going to live in peace. And it's like if you're not like you said, on war footing, that no, I'm not going to be dragged in by the left. I'm not going to be dragged in by the right. I'm not going to be dragged in by the conservative. I'm not going to be dragged in by the Republicans. I'm not going to be dragged in by the atheists. I'm not going to be dragged in by the born again Christians who tell everybody that they're going to hell if they don't believe like them. I'm not going to be dragged in by the Mormons who insist that, that I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example because I'm trying to be unanimous because we come from a Mormon background. But the point is it's like
Well,
I
no,
am not going to be dragged
and I
in by
would
the people
say,
who are
and I'm not going to be
going to
dragged in
war.
by, and I'm not going to be dragged in by Greg, and I'm not going to be dragged in by Jonathan.
Right.
Absolutely. Don't be dragged in by anybody but the good shepherd, because all
Right.
of us are sheep, and you're being led by sheep. And hallelujah for sheep. I'm glad I've got a sheep wife, and she's so nice. But I cannot be dragged away from my God by her. And the only way is I've had to get on war footing. Okay. Are you going to war with your wife? Yes. If she tries to pull me away from what God has told me to do, I'm going to go get those plates. Well, it's just not reasonable. You lost once, and then you had a better idea. Let's go get some gold and give it to him. And that was a good idea, I admit. But this idea of just going there and now you're going to do what? You're going to slay him because a voice tells you to. Hallelujah. That doesn't happen very often. But that then you have to go to war with even your kin, doing things that don't make sense to them and that put them in danger. Like, because that's what happens. Go ahead.
Just what you're really going to war with, I think, is that part of myself. I'm going to war with that part of myself,
Yes.
which will betray the truth.
Yes.
It's the same thing that will betray Christ.
Yeah.
Or will betray the truth as I understand it. So it's like, I'm not going to war with my wife, but it's like, I need to be a man. Like when it comes to my marriage, it's like, I've got to be able to, not be swayed when, it's like I know what's right, but maybe my wife is feeling weak in a particular area and she wants me to be weak with her and do the wrong thing. It's like, and women need to do the same thing with their husbands. It's like they need to cling to the truth, and if there is an area wherein they are being asked to sin against their conscience, it's the time
Yeah.
to even if it means that I do it and it brings hardship for a little while with my loved one. I want to go to war with that thing that would betray the truth within myself and to sin against truth, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, I like it. And within that frame comes the scripture, the natural man is an enemy to God. So not even talking about our wives, we can actually be an enemy to God. Our natural man, just what we do natural. And that word natural to me, I always hear normal. Just living a normal life, you're an enemy to God. Now, that would not be true living 500 years from now in Zion, okay? If you do what is normal in Zion, you're not an enemy because you're being trained up in the way you should go, and it's the right way. 500 years into Zion, we were not fortunate enough. We've been born into a society, whether you can see it or not, whether you've woke to it, that if you do what's normal, you are an enemy to God. And maybe not in every respect, but generally so, because that's the society that we have. That what is normal in our society is at odds with God at the level of where you are going to war against God, because the natural man is an enemy to God, and this society is being tuned more and more and more to support doing what is natural, and so it's natural in the animal kingdom to have sex with whoever you want. That's natural, okay? There's a few animals that won't do that, but it's natural. And humans, we can build rationales of why that's okay. But the natural man's an enemy to God. And it's unnatural to say, you know what, I'm going to keep my sexual intercourse just within this sphere, and I'm doing it not to look holy or anything. I'm doing it because I love God. So at the highest level, the most friendship level, the less enemy against God is you're doing it just because you love God. And so that you have to be trained to. So we're right now, the normal training that we have, public education, church, whatever's normal, is trending towards animosity towards God, and it's just going to get worse. We've kind of hastened the day, and things are underway, and so war footing is kind of a good understanding.
Yep.
And it's not fun to go to war, and thankfully we're not going to literal war right now, but we will. That's the thing is and um, it the Bible has said so, and Isaiah implies that a lot, at least a third of the world's population is going to die, and describes that as the wicked will kill the wicked. And so, yeah, there must be some fleeing, but right now, that's what our prophet, President Nelson, has said, that if you don't get close to God or be able to hear him, okay, like Nephi did, then you will die spiritually. He's describing that we are in a situation that's, he said, was it, unnormal. What's that term? Call for unnormal circumstances, call for unnormal responses. Anyhow, we are in a ahistorical time, and I sense that when he was saying that, like, yep, we have to take measures, and that's why I believe I was called as a street preacher, to go out and cry it to those who will listen. It's the pattern God will always do before he brings destruction. He'll send out street preachers and various people crying in the wilderness. And so, yeah, that's enough. Anything else you want to add, Jonathan?
No.
Okay. Hey, well, thanks. I knew this was going to be a little longer than our 30-minute one.
For a second afterwards.
Yeah. Let me end the recording, and then I'll talk to you just a second. Thanks for tuning in, people. And I believe we'll be talking about these concepts more. There's more WakeNOsis episodes lined up. Aaron Smith and I are going to talk about backward walking and going slow as ways into which to, and we're going back to do episode 4 because Aaron's sick, and but it's interesting how if you do things that are different, so we say get used to different, it'll actually alter your consciousness. So if you, for the next hour, did everything in slow motion, I only do it for a few minutes at a time, and it'll start altering your consciousness, and because it becomes focused. And so backward walking, so going an opposite direction of your society will actually start doing something to your it'll alter your consciousness, because you're no longer flowing with that normal thing. So we're going to explore that. Aaron Smith has been practicing backward walking, inviting people to that as like a health practice, and he finds it healthy. Myself, I was told by Jesus, go slow so you can go fast. And I go, what? But one day he told me, really slow down, Greg. When you get out of that hot tub, just go super slow. And then I go, oh, that's weird. It kind of altered my my consciousness. So I just give it a little preview of what's coming there. Let me see. Let me hit this. Where do I hit this? Oh, right here. Okay. Thank you.